Something catastrophic just happened in the Strait of Hormuz, and the world is only beginning to understand the scale of what went down. Iran just walked straight into the deadliest trap the United States has ever set in the Middle East, and what was meant to be Tehran's ultimate show of strength turned into one of the most humiliating military defeats in modern history. I'm talking about total annihilation. Not a single American ship scratched, not one sailor injured. But Iran? They lost almost everything they had built over nearly 5 decades in less than an hour. This isn't speculation. This isn't propaganda. This is what really happened on the night of May 7th, 2026, in the waters off the Iranian coast, and the consequences are still unfolding right now as we speak. Let me take you back to that night. It's May 7th, 2026, around 2140 local time. 3 American destroyers, the USS Mason, USS Truxtun, and USS Rafael Peralta, all Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers, entered the narrowest part of the Strait of Hormuz. They weren't sneaking through. They were sailing in tight formation, deliberately close to the Iranian side of the shipping channel, well within range of every coastal defense system Iran had spent decades perfecting. This was no accident. This was bait, and Iran took it. Hard. At 22:17, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps unleashed everything. I mean everything. Swarms of kamikaze drones, dozens of anti-ship cruise missiles, ballistic missiles streaking across the sky, and hundreds of fast attack boats pouring out of hidden caves and coastal shelters like angry hornets. This was the kind of coordinated assault that Iran had been practicing and refining for years. It was supposed to be the moment they proved to the world that the Strait of Hormuz belonged to them, that they could choke off 20% of the world's oil supply whenever they wanted, and that American naval power could be beaten by sheer numbers and asymmetric tactics. For a few minutes, it looked terrifying. The night sky lit up with fire. Missiles screamed toward the American ships. Fast boats raced across the water at over 50 knots. Iranian commanders were probably already drafting victory speeches. But then, reality hit them like a freight train. The Aegis combat system aboard those 3 destroyers did what it was designed to do, and it did it flawlessly. Working together in perfect coordination, the ships created an impenetrable shield of sensors and interceptors. The Spy-1D radars tracked thousands of targets simultaneously. Vertical launch systems fired SM-2, SM-3, and SM-6 missiles in rapid succession. Shahed drones were swatted out of the sky like flies. Cruise missiles were intercepted before they could even reach their terminal phase. Ballistic missiles were destroyed high in the atmosphere. And those fast attack boats, the so-called Red Wasps that Iran was so proud of, they were shredded. 5-inch naval guns, phalanx close-in weapon systems, and Hellfire missiles from helicopters turned the water into a graveyard. Boat after boat exploded or sank. The sea was littered with burning wreckage and debris. Within 38 minutes, it was over. Completely over. Not a single American ship was damaged. Not a single American sailor was hurt. Iran's entire assault, the culmination of 47 years of planning and investment, was erased in less than 40 minutes. Now let's talk about what this really means, because this wasn't just a tactical victory for the United States. This was a strategic catastrophe for Iran on a level that's hard to overstate. For nearly half a century, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps had been building what they called the missile cities. These were massive underground complexes, hidden deep beneath the mountains and rocky coastlines of southern Iran. We're talking about sprawling networks of tunnels, stretching for dozens of kilometers, fortified with blast-proof doors, climate-controlled launch halls, living quarters for crews, and multiple exit points designed to survive sustained bombardment. These weren't just caves. These were state-of-the-art military installations, protected by thick layers of rock and reinforced concrete, and they cost billions of dollars to build. The main hubs of this underground empire were concentrated in 5 key locations. Keshem Island, right at the narrowest point of the strait, housed one of the largest complexes. Bandar Abbas, Iran's primary naval base, had multiple interconnected tunnel systems. Further east, Sirik and Minab served as forward launch positions, while Bandar-e Khomeini provided deep strategic depth. Inside these facilities, Iran stockpiled thousands of missiles. Anti-ship missiles like the Nur and Kausar, ballistic missiles like the Zulfiqar with ranges over 1,000 kilometers, and hundreds of those fast attack boats we just talked about. The entire system was designed around a doctrine called sea denial. Iran never intended to win a conventional naval battle against the United States. They knew they couldn't. Instead, they planned to make the cost of operating in the Strait of Hormuz so high, so bloody, that America and its allies would eventually back off. By threatening to close the strait and cut off 20% of the world's daily oil supply, Tehran believed they held the ultimate trump card. And for years, Iranian commanders were absolutely convinced that their missile cities were virtually untouchable. The underground facilities were hardened against airstrikes. Mobile launchers could fire and quickly retreat into the tunnels. The complex terrain, shallow waters, and constant commercial shipping traffic made detection extremely difficult. Iranian leaders boasted in private briefings that any American attempt to control the strait would result in dozens of sunken warships and a global energy crisis. But here's the thing. The United States knew all of this. They knew about the missile cities. They knew about the swarm tactics. They knew exactly how Iran would respond to a provocation, and they prepared accordingly. For weeks, maybe even months before May 7th, the U.S. Navy and Air Force had been quietly assembling one of the most formidable concentrations of firepower the region has seen in years. 3 full carrier strike groups were already on station. The USS Abraham Lincoln was positioned in the Gulf of Oman. The brand new USS Gerald R. Ford, the most advanced nuclear-powered aircraft carrier on the planet, was stationed further south. A 3rd carrier strike group, whose exact identity remains partially classified, completed the triangle of American naval dominance. Supporting these carriers were 9 aerial refueling tankers. At least 5 KC-135 Stratotankers launched from bases in the UAE, with 4 additional tankers operating out of Israel and Jordan. This massive refueling network allowed American combat aircraft to stay airborne for extended periods, maintaining constant pressure over the entire battle space. The composition of American air power was equally devastating. Squadrons of F-35C Lightning II stealth fighters launched from the carriers, their advanced sensors providing real-time battlefield awareness. FA-18 Super Hornets stood ready for strike missions. EA-18G Growlers jammed Iranian radars and communication networks. High above, F-22 Raptors provided air superiority, virtually invisible to Iranian defenses. F-15E Strike Eagles and F-16 Fighting Falcons from regional bases added even more firepower. And then there were the MQ-4C Triton drones, America's high-altitude, long-endurance, unmanned surveillance aircraft. These sophisticated platforms patrolled the skies for hours, feeding constant intelligence to commanders. Their advanced sensors tracked every movement along the Iranian coast, every submarine in the shallows, every launch site hidden in the mountains. All of this preparation happened before Iran fired its first shot. Those 3 destroyers weren't sent in blindly. They were deliberately positioned as bait, knowing full well that Iran would respond with everything in its arsenal. Every sailor aboard those ships understood they were walking into a kill zone that American intelligence had been studying for years. This level of coordination reveals something absolutely critical. The United States had anticipated Iran's reaction with remarkable precision. They had mapped the locations of the missile cities. They understood Iran's doctrine. They knew exactly when and how the IRGC would respond. This wasn't a reactive operation. This was a pre-planned strategic masterstroke designed to lure Iran into exposing its most valuable military assets. Iran thought it was ambushing 3 American ships. In truth, America had orchestrated the entire stage, and Iran walked right into the trap. Now here's where it gets even worse for Iran. In the chaotic hours following the total failure of their swarm attack, the IRGC made a fatal mistake. Desperate to salvage the situation, they ordered the opening of multiple underground launch tunnels across their missile cities. They believed they could still launch a second, more powerful wave of missiles from the safety of their mountain fortresses. What they didn't realize was that American intelligence assets were watching their every move with unrelenting precision. The moment those massive blast-proof doors slid open and mobile launchers began emerging, U.S. surveillance systems locked onto them. MQ-4C Triton drones, F-35C sensor suites, and overhead reconnaissance satellites captured high-resolution imagery and exact coordinates in real time. Years of painstaking intelligence work suddenly paid off in minutes. What followed was a devastating series of precision strikes. American forces unleashed coordinated attacks on Iran's most critical underground facilities. Bandar Abbas was hit first. Heavy penetrator bombs slammed into tunnel entrances, collapsing key sections and trapping launchers inside. On Qeshm Island, strikes destroyed multiple interconnected tunnel networks that had taken over a decade to build. Sirik and Minab, the forward operational bases, suffered catastrophic damage as bunker-busting munitions penetrated deep into the mountain rock. Even Bandar-e-Khomeini, located further inland for strategic depth, was not spared. The precision was surgical. The United States deliberately targeted entrances, ventilation systems, and command nodes rather than attempting total destruction. The goal was clear: render the missile cities inoperable while sending an unmistakable message. In one night, Iran's greatest strategic asset, the underground empire it had hidden from the world for decades, was forcibly dragged into the light. Facilities that Iranian commanders once believed were invisible were now burning and exposed on satellite imagery shared across global intelligence channels. This was more than a tactical defeat. This was a strategic catastrophe of historic proportions. The missile cities had been Iran's ultimate insurance policy, the hidden sword they planned to wield in any major confrontation. By opening those tunnels under active American surveillance, Iran had voluntarily surrendered its most valuable military secret. The locations, layouts, and vulnerabilities of its entire underground network were now known to Washington. Military experts are describing this as one of the greatest intelligence windfalls in modern history. What took Iran 47 years and billions of dollars to construct was compromised in a matter of hours. The psychological blow inside Tehran was immense. Senior commanders who had promised the supreme leader that their missile cities were untouchable now faced the reality of exposed and damaged facilities. Years of secrecy, deception, and massive investment were undone by a single desperate decision to keep fighting after their surface attack had already failed. For the United States, this outcome represented the perfect execution of the trap. By baiting Iran into launching its full arsenal and then forcing the underground network to reveal itself, America achieved 2 decisive victories in one night, destroying Iran's immediate offensive capability and permanently degrading its long-term strategic deterrent. But the disaster didn't stop there. In the days following May 7th, Iran didn't just suffer a military humiliation. The country began sliding into a full-scale economic and strategic crisis. The Islamic Republic's economy, already fragile under years of sanctions, was dealt a near-fatal blow. With its naval and coastal missile capabilities shattered, Iran's ability to export oil through the Strait of Hormuz collapsed almost overnight. According to intelligence estimates, Tehran began losing approximately $500 million per day in oil revenue. For a country that derives nearly 70% of its national budget from oil sales and produces between 2 to 3.5 million barrels per day, this was absolutely catastrophic. Compounding the disaster was a massive oil spill. Near Karg Island, one of Iran's main export terminals, a damaged storage facility leaked crude oil that stretched across 71 kilometers of coastline. The environmental damage was severe, but the economic impact was even worse. With export terminals under constant threat and insurance rates for tankers skyrocketing, very few buyers were willing to risk loading Iranian crude. Iran's strategic oil reserve, once a source of leverage, were now dangerously low. Official estimates placed remaining storage capacity at only 40 to 90 million barrels, barely enough to sustain the country for a few weeks under current conditions. Salaries for government employees went unpaid. Subsidies were cut further. Inflation began spiraling out of control. The pressure on the regime from within was mounting rapidly, and there were whispers of unrest in major cities. Faced with this existential economic hemorrhage and the total collapse of its conventional military options in the Gulf, Iran made a dangerous and desperate decision. On May 17, 2026, during what was supposed to be a fragile ceasefire period, Iranian forces launched a surprise drone attack on the Barakah nuclear power plant in the United Arab Emirates. The plant, which supplies clean electricity to the UAE and is operated with South Korean technology, was struck by multiple Shahed-type kamikaze drones. While the damage was limited thanks to robust air defenses, the message was unmistakable. Iran was willing to internationalize the conflict and attack critical energy infrastructure beyond its borders. This attack marked a clear turning point. Having lost its underground missile cities and its swarm capabilities, the IRGC had run out of conventional military options in the Strait of Hormuz. The strike on Barakah was not a show of strength. It was an act of desperation. By targeting a civilian nuclear facility in a neighboring country, Iran crossed a dangerous red line, hoping to provoke a wider regional crisis that might force the United States to the negotiating table. Instead, the move backfired spectacularly. It unified Gulf Arab states even more firmly against Iran, and provided Washington with further justification for escalated action. Senior U.S. officials described the Barakah attack as a sign that the Iranian regime is losing control and becoming increasingly reckless. The contrast was striking. Just 10 days earlier, Iran believed its hidden underground empire gave it real power. Now, it was reduced to launching desperate long-range drone strikes against civilian targets, while its economy bled $500 million every single day. On May 18, 2026, just one day after the Barakah attack, the United States began final preparations for what insiders are calling Operation Sledgehammer. U.S. forces dramatically increased sorties of F-16 Wild Weasel aircraft, which specialize in destroying enemy air defenses. RC-135 rivet joint surveillance planes and E-2D Hawkeye aircraft now monitor over 2,000 targets simultaneously across a 300 nautical mile radius. Stocks of GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators, the most powerful bunker-buster bombs in the American arsenal, have been rapidly replenished at forward bases. Most significantly, Delta Force operators, already positioned in the Middle East since March, are reported to be on 24-hour alert. The name Operation Sledgehammer has now been officially circulated within senior Pentagon circles, and the message is unmistakable. America is preparing a decisive, large-scale military campaign against Iran's remaining military infrastructure. So let's recap what just happened here, because the speed and scale of this collapse is truly stunning. In just 11 days, Iran's 47-year strategy of asymmetric warfare and sea denial in the Strait of Hormuz has completely collapsed. Its secret missile cities, the crown jewel of its military strategy, have been exposed and crippled. Its swarm attack doctrine, which it practiced and refined for decades, lies in absolute ruins. Its economy is bleeding $500 million every single day, and its desperate strike on Barakah has only isolated the regime further on the international stage. The psychological impact inside Iran cannot be overstated. For nearly 5 decades, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps built its entire identity around the belief that it could hold the world hostage through control of the Strait of Hormuz. That belief is now shattered. The operational hinge point has arrived. The balance of power in the Middle East is shifting in real time, and we are watching it happen. The question now is not whether Iran has been severely weakened. That much is obvious. The question is, what happens next? How soon will Operation Sledgehammer begin? Will Iran attempt a final dangerous escalation, perhaps toward nuclear or terrorist tactics? Or will the regime finally break under the combined weight of military defeat, economic collapse, and internal unrest? These are the questions that military analysts, intelligence officials, and policymakers around the world are asking right now. And the answers will shape the future of the entire region for decades to come. What we witnessed on the night of May 7th, 2026, was not just a battle. It was a masterclass in strategic deception, intelligence preparation, and the overwhelming power of modern networked warfare. The United States didn't just win a fight. They dismantled an entire military doctrine that Iran had spent nearly half a century building. And they did it in less than 40 minutes. The myth of Iranian invincibility in its own backyard has been shattered. The Strait of Hormuz, which Tehran hoped to turn into its ultimate weapon, has instead become the graveyard of its most cherished military dreams. The pictures are still being analyzed. The full extent of the damage is still being assessed. But one thing is already crystal clear. Iran's doctrine of asymmetric warfare in the Strait of Hormuz has suffered a historic, possibly fatal blow, and the consequences are only beginning to unfold. Now I want to hear from you. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. How soon do you think Operation Sledgehammer will begin? Do you think Iran will attempt one final desperate escalation? Or is the regime finally out of options? What do you think happens next in the Middle East now that this balance of power has shifted so dramatically? I read every single comment, and I want to know what you think. If this deep dive gave you the clearest picture of what is really happening in the Strait of Hormuz right now, then do me a favor. Hit that like button. Share this video with anyone who needs to understand the truth about what just went down. And subscribe right now so you never miss a critical update, because this story is far from over. We also upload the full audio version to Spotify if you want to listen on the go. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end. In times like these, staying informed is more important than ever. Stay safe, stay aware, and I'll see you in the next one.